Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ. Welcome to today's Connect webinar with Goliath. Going to go over the top 3 painful end user experience issues in 2021, and can't wait to hear what these are. I'm sure you guys have a rough idea of your own. But before we get into that, just want to remind you of some upcoming events that we have with CUGC. We've got 2 user share webinars coming up in the next, actually in early April. So user share webinars are content that's brought to us directly from the CUGC community. So definitely check those out. They're unsponsored and they're a great way to just connect and get some questions answered. Also, our CUGC XL Central event is coming up in April, and it's a afternoon-long event full of great technical sessions, some more networking. I think that this one has a comedian lined up. So definitely check out the agenda for that. You can see the link to the events calendar at the bottom of the page, so take a screenshot. All right, so as it says, we are recording today's webinar. You'll get an email tomorrow. It'll have a link to this recording, and it'll come directly from GoToWebinar, so be on the lookout for that. During the presentation today, we do want to take your questions, so please put them in the question box at any time. We're going to try to save them to the end of the presentation just to keep everything moving along, but definitely type them in as you have them, and we will try to get to as many as we can. Also at the end, I'm going to throw a link in the chat to a survey. It's short and anonymous and for CUGC use only, and it's also a great way for you to let us know what kind of other topics you want to hear about this year in webinars. All right, so who do I have with us today? We have James Rankin. He is a CTP. He's also part of the UK CUGC group. We have Avi Lipp. He's a technical consultant with Goliath Technologies, and Stacy Leidwinger. She's the CMO at Goliath Technologies. And then we also have Bart Jacobs on with us. He is a newly minted CTP. Congratulations, Bart, on that achievement. Bart's going to keep an eye on your questions as you type those in, and he's going to help moderate the discussion later on. So welcome, everyone. So glad you could join us. At this point, I think I'm going to hand things right over to Avi to get us started. And I am going to turn off my camera and disappear, but I'll see you guys in just a little bit. Bye.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. We are really excited to have all of you here with us today to really talk about those top 3 pain points as IT pros you've been struggling with in 2021. And one of the things we're going to do and hopefully be a little different is not give you a big marketing pitch around Goliath, but instead we're going to really rely on James here, who many of you know and has been in the end user computing space for quite a while. Blogging, recording YouTube videos, and I know he can't wait to get back out on the road. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to James, and then Avi will follow up with some demonstrations of the technology. But James, do you want to talk about those nasty problems that have been plaguing you and others here in 2021?
I sure do. Thank you very much, Stacy. And I mean, I think one thing that's probably pretty much, it's certainly on my radar in just about everything that I seem to get dragged into these days is Citrix Cloud, right? I've been involved with Citrix Cloud since 2018, which is quite early in its lifespan. Interestingly enough, last week I had a recruitment agent who phoned me up and said he needed somebody with 10 years experience of Citrix Cloud, which I found rather amusing since it's only been around for a few years, but I'm digressing there. The Citrix Cloud, right? It's not just about the cloud, rather bizarrely enough, right? It's going to creep up on you even if you are fully on premises or if you're hybrid, because Citrix are so keen to get people into Citrix Cloud that they are discounting quite heavily on licenses at the moment. So, I mean, I've just done a project with people whose workers were completely on premises, but the control plane and the licensing was done via Citrix Cloud. So I think it's fair to point out that if you're not coming into contact with Citrix Cloud now, you probably will be as soon as renewals come along. So I've been through quite a lot of the pain around Citrix Cloud. And one of the things that you get with it is that you kind of hand over a bit of the control of your infrastructure when you move to any cloud service, really. But you're used to managing all of this yourself, and it's a bit of a shock for admins, really. And one of the most vital components in this kind of infrastructure, which is not the only one, but is the cloud connector itself, right? So you've got to have cloud connectors wherever your resource groups are. So you've got to have cloud connectors next to your on-premises ones, your cloud workers, wherever they sit. And the first thing I find that people like struggle with really is they say, how many cloud connectors do I need, right? How many do I need to put in there? So you've got to understand how much load is going to be on these cloud connectors in the first instance, right? Now, if you talk to Citrix, they're always going to err on the side of caution. They're probably going to give you more than you need, right? Now, especially if you're putting your workers in cloud as well, a lot of the time people say to me, well, we don't want the cost to go up, so we only want as many cloud connectors as we need, not as many as Citrix are telling us that we need. So you've got to get that sizing right in the first instance. So to get the sizing right, you've got to understand what is going to be going through those cloud connectors, what sort of throughput is going to be there, how many sessions are they going to be hosting, and how much resource you need to apply. And that's the first thing that people kind of struggle with because they don't really know, right? And Citrix themselves sometimes aren't particularly helpful around it. Once you've got the cloud connectors in there, right, then what you need to do is see if they are working optimally, or on the flip side, do you have too many cloud connectors and you're paying for cloud connectors, you know, that may be a part of the cost of the run cost of your service? Can you consolidate them down? So it's important to understand what exactly is going on. You don't get an awful lot of visibility into the cloud connectors themselves, right? Citrix will tell you if a cloud connector has been offline for a period of time, if it's undergoing maintenance or something like that. But short of that, you don't get much off-the-shelf visibility into this kind of link in the chain. And I've got a case for one of my customers at the minute where they're seeing big spikes on the cloud connectors and they think it's causing an issue, and Citrix don't think it's an issue. And because they don't have any deep monitoring, right, it's just becoming a bit of a bun fight between them. It's like, well, Citrix is saying it's okay, but we think it's not. You know, we think that's the problem, but we're not particularly sure. So again, we're left a little bit in limbo, and it's difficult to get them to take them seriously. But also what you've got is you've got things like Director and Web Studio, right? And even analytics if you want to pay for that. But they're kind of limited in what they provide, particularly on the infrastructure side of things, right? They're very focused on the worker servers. We've got another ongoing issue where we have a couple of unresponsive servers will start, you know, users will log on to gray screens. And this happens every day in one of the environments I work in. And the problem is, because of the way Director works, the only way we can tell it's happening is if there's more than 200 failed connections in half an hour. If we set it any lower than that, right, basically what happens is we get lots of false positives. So the problem we've got is we have to wait for 200 users to be affected in a period of time before we can react to that issue and put the server that's having a problem into maintenance. So we need some proper monitoring to try and get that visibility of, you know, the workers and the infrastructure components. Now, the bit is that if you have these kind of blind spots, I've got the problem where my administrators tend to try and box around this problem themselves, right? And if you just click on to the next slide, Avi, basically I have, this is what my admins came up with, and it's a list of the cloud connectors and their utilization. Now, they did all this off their own bat, which was nice, but the problem is it requires the remote registry running to do this, and security are going to say no to that. So again, we've got an example. The admins are using their time and their resources to go around trying to find out things that really we should be giving them out of the box anyway, right? So it's a bit of a waste of their time. So they've boxed around it. If we wanted to use this ourselves, it will be a security risk, you know, and it takes a lot of their time and skill. And interestingly, actually, if you look on the right-hand side here, you've got a list of some of our cloud connectors there. And what it's doing is it's showing how many servers it's servicing and how many sessions it's servicing. Now, you don't get this visibility natively, so they've had to do it themselves. But the interesting thing is that when we ran this, we found out that the load balancing actually doesn't seem to be working correctly. You can see that there's quite a spread in the servers and the sessions that are being hosted. And actually, I've just spoke to Citrix about an hour ago about it, and they said there has been some sort of failure in the back-end load balancing. Now, we wouldn't have known this if we hadn't gone out and done this ourselves, right? And I don't know whether Citrix were actually alerting on it or not. I know they do use some bits of stuff in there to do monitoring, but whether it's monitoring that as well. So the point I'm trying to make here is often you don't understand how your cloud services operate, right? So it makes supporting them difficult, you know, and the case in point here is the load balancer. So if you hadn't pulled this data out, we wouldn't know. And I'll tell you what, here's a request to the guys at Goliath. If you could produce a graphical diagram that showed real-time kind of usage of load balancing and things like that across cloud connectors, that would be absolutely great, right? Because we just get an at-a-glance view of how it's operated. But the problem is, right, sometimes we end up opening cases for things. We had a case about port exhaustion on some of our cloud connectors, and the case floated around for ages. And eventually, after we complained about it, some really clever Citrix guy from the cloud engineering team came on and fixed it in about half an hour. The point is, because we didn't have that visibility into that, we couldn't really spot this kind of anomalous behavior, and we couldn't then take it to the vendor and get some traction on it. So these infrastructure components, like cloud connectors, but there's also FAS servers and things like that as well to take into, they're vital to your service health as a whole, but you don't really have full control over them. And, they feel like a bit of, as we say, a blind spot in your overall solution. So if you can get more visibility into this, you can address the issue of that blind spot, you can spot performance issues before they start, and you can do something about them before you get to the stage I'm at, where you have to wait for 200 users to be having problems before you can actually do anything about it, which is not a very good situation to be in, but I'm trying to get the customer to get some uptake on that.
Well, thank you, James. And I think we're going to take a quick second here to actually get a poll, right, and see how many of you are planning to move to Citrix Cloud. So you're already on Citrix Cloud. Do you plan to move to Citrix Cloud at some level in the next 12 months, or you do not see this in your future? Although I think James might challenge you there, depending on renewal time. But I have to say, James, a lot of what you shared right now, these are the things that we were hearing from our clients. We worked with a credit union, for example, and they had just moved to Citrix Cloud, and all of a sudden they lost all visibility. Every report they had set up, alerts and scripts they had set up was gone almost overnight. And they didn't think it would be an issue, but their users were still having issues. And now they didn't know, was it in the cloud? Was it within some of the architecture on premise? Was it in their home office? And this, of course, happened right when the remote workers came. I don't know, Stephanie, can you share the results? There we go. So it looks like we've got almost a third split, where a third of you are already on the cloud, a little more than a third are looking to move, and then a good 40%, I guess, are still sticking to traditional. So the good news is a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes here really applies, whether it's Citrix Cloud or not. But what Goliath has done, and Avi's going to give you just a snapshot of one of the capabilities we offer here, is provide comprehensive Citrix Cloud monitoring. Because of the way that both Goliath and Citrix is architected, we're able to provide that proactive monitoring of the entire Citrix Cloud infrastructure, alert you if there is a performance issue. In many cases, we can remediate that issue automatically, so you never have to touch it. We can also give you the visibility, James, you were talking about, to really troubleshoot. Is it within the Citrix Cloud, or is it something that's going on in the user environment, or is it another underlying maybe server or VM that might be part of the infrastructure? And then maybe the most important piece of all of this is giving you the documentation so that you can either talk to Citrix, your other IT teams, whether it be the network team, the storage team. Often people don't realize when they're not a Citrix expert how many of those elements need to come together to deliver user experience. And it's so critical to document root cause so you can have those cross-functional collaborations. And then in addition to the infrastructure, we're going to provide all of that for the cloud connector. So if the connector goes down, we can automatically alert you, or if it's causing poor performance, and then we can automatically remediate in many instances. So we're going to provide you that same capability, same visibility, going beyond just looking at the traditional APIs. We're doing this in a very unique fashion. So we're looking at it from the end user out to everything. We're not just looking at it as individual component parts. And it's because of this comprehensive solution that we can really give IT pros the visibility and control that they normally had on premise, or maybe never had if they weren't using a third-party tool, but the convenience of leveraging everything that you get when you do start moving that control plane into Citrix Cloud. So if we go to the next slide.
Point, Stacy, about cloud services in general as well, right? It becomes difficult to sort of apportion the blame, really, for want of a better word, when you're dealing with things. And you need to have data to come back with, right? You can't just go in and say this doesn't work and just leave it there, right? You're always going to get pushed back on it. So when you're a traditional admin, right, you know everything about your service, right? You just go in and fix it. You understand it perfectly. Whereas once you move into cloud service, as I say, there's a lot of moving parts, and there's some quite surprising bits about it that you find once you do dig into Citrix Cloud. So that visibility is vital.
100%. And it's also that multi-cloud environment, right? Where a lot of people didn't just move to Citrix Cloud. They've moved to Citrix Cloud and they've put some of the data later in Azure and some of it's on-prem. So you've got this hybrid environment, multi-cloud environment, new services for authentication, for reporting, and all of that needs to come together and is impacting the user. And we talk about this a lot, and we see this a lot, where you simply don't have the visibility you need to. And that's where you've got a lot of finger pointing when something happened. Is it with Azure? Is it with Citrix Cloud? Is it something on the on-prem? And so one of the ways that we go ahead and provide that proactive monitoring is using our very lightweight, easy to deploy architecture. And so this does not take a lot of time to go ahead and get set up. The way that we can proactively alert you is based on either location or wherever your users are. If they're all remote, we have organizations that put our launchers in the cloud. In fact, we work with a really large airline where they're supporting all of their customer service agents. So these launchers are in different Amazon Workspace cloud areas that they're kicking off. And they're going to log in just as a user would. And they're going to continually test throughout the day, logging into Citrix Cloud, hitting those different connectors and zones, connecting into every piece of the infrastructure, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, to go ahead and confirm not only are they able to get to the virtualized desktop or the applications and launch what they need to, but that it's also performing at a high quality and speed. So to your point of waiting for 200 users to fail, we can automatically let you know if there is a failure point, and then we have screenshot evidence that shows you where that failure point was. So you can determine, is it an anomaly, or is this something that everyone's going to hit? So over time, we've been able to save our clients. We had one client that told us we saved them 25,000 hours of downtime. We're working, I mentioned another credit union. They've got 5 different branches. They just moved to Citrix Cloud. They finally are kind of letting a sigh of relief out that now they know whenever their staff goes into the branch, because they are still there, that it's working the way it should. Before us, they just had to sit back and wait for a complaint. Then they had to wait to file it with Citrix. The resolution times were skyrocketing when issues did occur. So with that, Avi, do you want to maybe go ahead and turn into the technology?
Certainly. What I'll start off with is showing kind of what's happening on the back end with this piece of the technology with a quick video here, where what you'll see is the technology from those different locations will launch a web browser to the Netscaler storefront sign-in page, has the ability to accept any security statements. It'll log in with credentials just like an end user would, confirm authentication, navigate within the storefront page. It'll then search for specified resources. So whether you're testing for applications or desktops, the technology will search for those. Once it finds them, it'll click on it, confirm a successful presentation of the resource, close it out, and then move on to the next one. And we'll have some clients that run this 24/7, such as in healthcare, for example, or for enterprise organizations, they'll have this run, say, at 6 in the morning to get ahead of any issues before end users log in for the day. Then, say if there are no alerts, you have peace of mind knowing that all the end users are going to be able to access their resources for the day. But if there is an alert, this is where you come within the technology to investigate what the bottleneck was or why there was a failed launch. And where I'm looking at right now is the Application Availability Analysis tab. This is a central monitoring configuration console for all those launches taking place across the environment. At the top of the page, it's a high-level dashboard where the blue bars represent the average launch time, and then the yellow trend line shows the overall availability at any point in time. You can filter this based off the different date ranges. You can filter this based off different locations. So we have, UHS, for example, is a health system over in the States where they are launching from these Citrix sessions from over 60 different hospital sites, and you'd be able to see all those different hospital sites right here. And then you have the specific resource that you're testing. So whether it's in healthcare with an EHR application or any of your business critical applications, you'd be able to see all of those right there. Then at the bottom of the page, you have details of each of those specific launches. So the date and time, the resource, the location where that launch was taking place from, the session host, and then ultimately whether that launch was successful or if it failed. Now, in this environment, we see that all these launches are successful. That's great. But let's just say, for example, there was a failed launch. You would then see exactly at which stage there was a failure, and then you can drill into this magnifying glass, which will give you step-by-step details of each step of the logon process. So you can see here again, entering credentials, navigating within the storefront page, the enumeration stage, and then seeing that it was a successful launch. But again, if there was a failure, You then have screenshot evidence of exactly what would have presented itself to the end user. So whether your resources are on-prem, whether the control plane is in Citrix Cloud, anytime that there would be a failure, you'd be able to see what would have presented itself to the end user. And where that's helpful is in a number of different ways. One, you don't have to rely on an end user to replicate an issue because you can see exactly what would have presented itself here. Failed logons have been historically tough to troubleshoot because if a session hasn't been initiated, you only have so much information. By having all these details here, you can then be able to have further insight than you would have had otherwise. Common use case, say if there's a maintenance window overnight, you do some updates to a particular application that lead it to not be published to the end users. This technology runs its course. It would then fail at the enumeration stage because that application wasn't being published anymore. Technology can't click on it. You then get a real-time alert and can get ahead of those issues before end users were to log in and not have their resource to be selected. And that is one of the proactive features of the technology. I will flip back to the PowerPoint and pass it back over to James, I believe. Let me see.
I was going to say, that's quite cool, that auto kind of launch up stuff. Can that work with MFA as well?
It can. Yep, the configuration is very easy. It's all done in the UI.
I'll have to have a look at that.
Sounds good. So let me flip over to the next screen right here. For the next work case, is challenging supporting remote workers.
Yes, there is. I can't remember. This is my slide or not. My brain's gone out of there. It is, isn't it? Yeah, remote workers are basically, since COVID-19's come along, it's a huge, huge issue, and I spend a lot of my time talking about the challenges of remote workers. And I mean, the first thing is obviously from a security perspective, right? Unmanaged devices are a security nightmare, and we have, a company I work for have 6,000-7,000 offshored sort of service providers who work with them, and all of these users have been sent home now. And not only are they on unmanaged devices that I have no control over, they're often in very sort of rural areas of India, actually, a lot of them, and not surprisingly, the internet coverage is not great out there either. So we've got all the problems of infrastructure out there, but also the security considerations as well. And there's a lot to sort of digest as we've moved to this model. The first thing is, how do you support them, right? How have your support teams had to adapt to try and support them? And I've touched on this previously in other presentations that I've done, but the sort of thing is, right, you don't have any kind of constants involved anymore, right? You used to have workers that were in specific locations on specific devices. They had infrastructure links that you understood of a certain quality. You understood the applications and services, not only what they were connecting to, how they were connecting to them, and they were very well documented. Now that's all flipped around quite a bit. And the challenge is for support teams when it goes to supporting remote workers is to actually almost, approach things completely differently. I mean, a lot of the things that happen are caused by problems within the user's own local environment first, right? Now, traditionally, your support worker would attack that from a different perspective because they had control over those devices and they knew what to expect and they knew that certain level of functionality on it. But now that there's no element of control over the device, you need to get data. Now, it's very difficult to get data out of a remote user when you're just talking to them over the phone or something like that, right? What you need is actual actionable data that you can see. So things like, I don't know, if you want to take some examples, is the user on a poor network connection, as we said, right? Now, I've had problems with the support teams where I work. They've been on with users saying, oh, this poor user, he can't get a connection, performance is poor, and they're looking at X, Y, and Z. And then you go in and look at the data and you say, look at the latency on the connection, right? He's never, ever going to have even anywhere near close to being an acceptable performance because his network conditions are terrible, right? And you have to show that the data should be driving what you're doing instead. Have they got something like an out-of-date Citrix client? This is another thing that keeps coming up over and over again. when I discuss things, and mainly it's around another probably hot button topic in IT at the minute is about Teams optimization. Now, if you've got out of date clients, right, now you've got all these people trying to use Teams for voice and video, but they can't do the optimization. So this is a bit of a double whammy, really. If you've got out of date clients out there, so maybe they've got a really old laptop with an old version of the receiver on there, and then they're running Teams through that, not only are they having a poor performance, it's also going to impact all the rest of the other users on there as well. So that's another huge challenge, and it's important to be able to see what version of the client that you've got, and also to undertake some remedial action to actually go out there and get the users up to a supported level. And again, these things are very difficult with people working remotely, but you've got to adapt around it. But data is very useful to let you quickly spot things, right? I've had other examples. I think it was somebody again who was saying they were having poor performance in Teams. Spoke to the service desk and they were like, well, we've changed around the Teams settings, right? And it doesn't seem to be working very well. We can't figure it out. And when I went in and looked at the data, it was pretty obvious straight away that this user had actually run a Citrix desktop session, then they'd opened another Citrix desktop session from within their original one, and they were running Teams on the second one, which was never going to perform greatly anyway. But the fact of the problem was as well is that the receiver on the first Citrix session, so the receiver on the desktop they'd connected to, was out of date because it had to connect to old NetScalers. So again, that was the problem with the performance. And the kind of service desk didn't understand that until, as I say, talking to the user on the phone, they just think they're using Teams, right? But once you go into the data and look, you can say, hang on, that's a remote version of Teams that you've launched there. So now you understand that what you call that user journey. It's important to understand how users are doing things, because then you can understand where things are going wrong a bit better. And there's also a problem with, I think it's on the next slide, I think I've talked through about the main options on there, is about what I've called rabbit hole. And yeah, that is on there, right? Now, what you've got to remember is, right now, for a lot of us, our support teams are also remote as well as the workers, right? Now, when you're in the office, you've always got other people around you if you're working in a support team, right? You can ask for a second opinion, you can get a second pair of eyes on something. But now they're all working remotely as well, right? Sometimes, competent support people, I mean, I completely include myself in this. Sometimes I'll think something's the issue and I go after that issue and I lose visibility of everything else that it could be, right? And it's not until I finally sit there and back off a bit and have a think that you start understanding. Now, data is very valuable here as well, because if you've got data about what's going on in a session, you can sit there and look at that data and then maybe change your mind. And especially when you haven't got people around you that you can ask for a second opinion. As I said, that data, getting in the habit of being driven by data, right, is also very important. So I've got another customer that I work with where their service desk, they were having a lot of problems with profiles locking. So I worked out why it was happening and I showed them how to unlock it. Now, about a week after that, I suddenly found that every problem that came in, they were just going in and removing user profile locks straight away, right? And I was like, when all you've got is a hammer, I guess everything looks like a nail, right? But I had to go back and say, look, you need to do some proper troubleshooting. You need to look at the data first. Don't just try a first-time fix, because that happens a lot, right? Go in there, look at the problem, and react to the data. And that's the way that you can get in the habit of delivering a better service all round, especially when you're supporting remote workers. But I guess that point stands for, for every worker really, whether we're in the office or not, is using the data to drive a better service to your end users.
Those are all some awesome points. And so when we're talking about data, that is one of the things that our clients tell us, that the amount of data and the broad and deep subset of data that we're able to provide for our clients are really able to help out with that troubleshooting process. Instead of having an idea of what the issue could actually be, actually having the data drive you to where the actual bottleneck is. So what I'll do is I'll pull up the technology and show, kind of how, it's laid out and how our clients do use this information to be able to troubleshoot in a couple different scenarios. So where I just flipped to is the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Session Display. Something that's important to know is we don't average or roll up any of our data. So you'll get the same level of granular detail for a session that took place 2 weeks ago, a month ago, as you would for an active session. So say when end user Joe is saying, hey, I've been having, Citrix has been slow for the past, 20 days, you can easily be able to come to this screen and be able to search for, just Joe's sessions, and be able to see, okay, was Joe actually having performance issues for the past 20 days? Then When you're ready to investigate as to what could have actually been the bottleneck in any particular session, what you then just do is click on this on the particular session. And what will populate here is a screen that has all the high-level key data points that went into the user session. And just a use case that we have, we're working with this with a insurance company close by our headquarters over in Philadelphia, where they had a number of different technologies that were all being rolled out. This was pre-COVID, but they were already starting remote working as a staple in their business. They were, injecting iGel into their infrastructure, where end users are now using iGel for the first time, but they've been using Citrix for a while they're using Cisco soft phones, and they started having performance issues while they're working remotely with the new technology being iGel. But iGel is a fantastic technology, but the end users were blaming iGel on those performance issues when it really had nothing to do with iGel. It's just that was the new technology that they were using. So the end users didn't know any better. They were just thinking, okay, it must be iGel that's the issue. But in fact, it was actually the Wi-Fi at the end user's location that was the bottleneck. And that's something that can sometimes take a while to troubleshoot, but with our technology, we point you right to it. So I'll kind of just show how you can see that information in the console. From this screen right here, again, this has all the high-level key data points that went into that user's Citrix session. So, the client endpoint machine, the Citrix receiver version, the hypervisor host that was supporting the session. You have a mini topology view here where you're able to see in just one glance all of the components that contributed to that user Citrix session. So the client endpoint device, how they connected into the environment. Was this an internal connection? Was it an external connection? The delivery controller that brokered the session, AD, the session host, and then again, the hypervisor layer. You have a logon summary breakdown, but you have a dedicated logon tab across the top. We have further detail for all these different tabs. And then you have these key performance metrics. So in this particular use case, again, remote workers are having issues while they're working from home, don't know the exact root cause. First place that you take a look at is round trip time. And anytime that, as we all know, when round trip time is above 350 milliseconds, around 350 to 400, that's when latency is going to be apparent to the end user. And so what we've done is just, based off of this threshold line here of 350 milliseconds, you can easily be able to identify, okay, this user was having performance issues at the end of the session. Now we want to understand, was it more of a network related issue or a resource utilization issue? And where I take a look at next is network latency. And this network latency is real-time network latency from the ICA protocol itself. This is not an ICMP or ping-based test, but it's an accurate representation of how much the network overall from the client endpoint all the way to the data center is impacting round trip time. And what I can see is when round trip time spiked, there was a spike in network latency. I now know it's a network issue. But I also want to find out, because this worker's working remotely, is it the Wi-Fi connection at their location that's a potential issue? And that's what connection speed is. Connection speed is the amount of bandwidth that is available for a receiver or the workspace app wherever that user is located at. So when they're working from their home office in this case, whether they're working from a branch office or from a Starbucks connected via mobile hotspot. The amount of bandwidth is available strictly for Citrix. And so when I see that network latency spiked, it also correlates with the drop in connection speed from 27 megabits per second all the way down to 4.2 and then 2.8, which is not nearly enough to support a satisfactory Citrix session. You'll typically want that to be at least 10 megabits per second. And so by looking at this, you can quickly come up with the conclusion, okay, user was having performance issues, was caused by the network, and specifically a drop in connection speed all the way down to 2.8. Nowadays, when you're talking to an end user, they'll usually be pretty defensive right off the bat about their ISP, saying, oh, it can't be my ISP. They said I have the most amount of bandwidth possible. In which case, because it's time stamped down to the second, you can say, oh, well, you know what, I see at 12:53, you did have plenty of connection. But when you started having the issues, it was because of this drop in connection speed. What was happening at that time at 12:56? Oh, that's when the kids started streaming Xbox or streaming Netflix. Maybe this user just walked farther away from the router, and it coincided at the exact same time when they were having the performance issue. So it's real easy to quickly pinpoint bottlenecks when it comes to remote workers, if it's from a network perspective, or if it is more of a resource utilization issue. In the same screen, you have the session host resources, so CPU, memory, or the hypervisor host metrics, all correlated for the time frame of that user session. So gives you a very high level, be able to solve issues that sometimes would take a while, being able to solve them in just a couple clicks. Now, another aspect of the technology, and well, in general, that plays a role. We talked about network and resources and how that can impact performance, but something that is sometimes a blind spot is end user behavior. We all know that end users don't always follow by, Citrix best practices on what they should be doing within their sessions. And the way how Citrix is architected, and the ICA channel specifically, is there are virtual channels that handle different functionality based off of what that user was doing. So here you can see all these different ICA channels. At the top, we have this group by end user experience, just as a a category here, where you can see audio bandwidth. Was this user streaming audio? Clipboard bandwidth. Was it a large copy and paste job that hung up the session? Thin-wire bandwidth, which is a Citrix display adapter. Was this user doing something graphically intensive within their session that was impacting performance? And you'll notice how all of these are inbound and outbound. This is from the server perspective. So audio bandwidth in. Was that user on a Teams call and talking into the session? Audio bandwidth out. Was that user streaming Pandora or Spotify during their session? And based on the type of bandwidth that is being utilized within their session, you can then get insight into end user behavior. So in this particular example, round trip time spiked at the end of the session. Remember, we also had a drop in connection speed. At that same time, when we had a drop in connection speed, this user also was utilizing thin wire bandwidth and audio bandwidth, very likely streaming a video, maybe a YouTube clip. At the same time, when there's a drop in connection speed, no wonder that there is high round trip time. So being able to get insight into end user behavior is something that our clients tell us is very helpful, because everything could look fine from a resource perspective or a network perspective. But again, end users may be doing certain things within their session that can impact performance that would have traditionally been a blind spot. And this is all you can always look at this information historically. So if you see that end user Joe consistently has high thin wire bandwidth, maybe he's just a huge sports fan, is constantly playing sports in the background or whatnot. And that is what I was going to cover within the technology. Let me pull back the PowerPoint slide, and I believe at this point I am passing it back to you, James. Let's see here.
Indeed, and yeah, another way that my life has changed, probably not for the better, for the last couple of years. So, is that I am constantly being asked for data, right? The powers that be want lots of data, and they want it so much more now, much more than I've ever realized. And there's probably quite a lot of reasons for this. A lot of it, again, is tied into COVID, because virtual platforms previously were kind of like just for mobile users, right? For people who were doing remote working, and it was a bit of a, occasionally people would work from home. But now everybody's using it, right? So they need to understand absolutely everything about what's going on. And they want to look at trending and history. They want to look at work patterns and things like that. And it's not necessarily a big brother is watching you kind of thing that we've got, but also we've seen a lot of people wanting to understand how users' work patterns are changing and adapting, right? And well, we found that looking at our environments, we've got a lot of users based in the UK who are now working longer into the evening times, right? And management want to understand this, are they working too hard? Are they feeling the pressure that they must be seen to do things and be working later because we're all working remotely? No, they do. But also, do we need to adjust how we support these people, because kind of like the peak hours have changed slightly? I mean, we get a big peak about 3-4 o'clock in the morning because we have a lot of offshore users in the Indian subcontinent. But then again, we're seeing almost like a mini peak between about 6 and 9 o'clock in the evening now, as we get more users working remotely. And this raised up something interesting, because we found a lot of users were actually complaining about poor performance about 9 p.m. And we were kind of like, really? You shouldn't be getting terrible performance at 9 p.m. because the bulk of the users have gone. And again, we went and did some investigation, and we found that rather bizarrely, we had some sort of antivirus scan or SysQAMP scan or something like that set to run at 9 p.m. Now, it wasn't, if it didn't run at 9 p.m., it would run another time. It literally just ran at 9 p.m. That was it. Somebody had arbitrarily decided this. And because our users were now working later, previously, they didn't really notice, right? Because it was just getting hammered and nobody cared. But now, all of a sudden, we've got more users on the platform at that later time. So we had to adjust that to try and, to accommodate these new working hours that people have got. But also what you've got is, people want to understand the productivity of users, right? Again, I talk about our offshored users. They're all business process outsourcing, and there's a dollar value attached to that, right? And if they aren't working at the level that they normally can, if performance is bad, then that affects the company's bottom line, right? It starts costing them money. So very soon you do get the request come down from on high. Why is the performance bad? Make it better and give us some reports that show that you've made it better. That's the important bit. It's not important enough to fix it. I've got to show that I've fixed it, right? And I can't fix that just by saying nobody's shouting about it. They want to see actual real data about that. And there's also the security aspect of this as well. Security is now, as I mentioned before, because of all the unmanaged devices, security are now absolutely bonkers crazy about wanting to understand what's going on in the environment, and they want to see who's got access to things like being able to print and being able to copy and paste out of sessions. They're very interested in data loss prevention. They want to see data as to who's got those capabilities, whether they're using the capabilities as well, whether anybody's trying to use it who shouldn't be using it. There's a lot of this, but we've also got to focus on run cost as well, licensing and cost, right? Because I work in a financial services environment, everything has to be driven by cost, right? And if that cost goes up, right, and we start using more licenses, then people will say, how do we get down to reduce this cost? Now, this is something I've found very difficult because I'm not used to doing things that perspective. I'm kind of just a techie. I'm not used to kind of balancing the books, as it were. But now what we do is we do quite a lot of looking at data, sort of trending the resource usage, and even looking at different versions of the virtual machines that we have available in AWS, for instance, which is where most of our work is, to see if we can adjust the user density and get more bang for our buck and reduce those run costs. And even if it's only a few $1,000s per month, then management wants to go ahead and do it. So we're constantly passing data and trying to pass things across. So we can free licenses up, so we can, reduce some of the infrastructure requirements, all that sort of stuff all goes in there, and we get a lot of this. And the other thing that's very interesting about data that I think, there's a lot of mileage to be had in is, we've got all these users working remotely now, is looking for anomalous behavior around that. Say you've got Dave from accounts, right? He comes in at 9 o'clock every morning and he generally runs Excel and maybe some other finance related applications. If Dave all of a sudden logs in at 3 a.m. and then starts running PowerShell, right? That data is almost sort of like a weapon in your security armory, right? You can see that something's going on there that's very unusual. And security teams are very interested in that sort of stuff. They want to look at that sort of user behavior. They want to understand it, and they want to be able to mitigate against it. Because, as I said, working in financial services as well, we have very, very sort of deep, very sort of cloak and dagger pen tests going on at any given time. There are actually people who sit in our environments who are meant to emulate bad actors, and the sooner we spot that, the sooner we get brownie points basically for having that kind of defense in-depth strategy. And again, data is absolutely vital, because not only is it a case of spotting it, we've then got to show that we can track back through everything that they've done. So we've got to have all that data to then go through it and do breach response around it as well. So yes, I will say that one of my biggest pain points at the minute is having to parse data and produce data and balance the books, as it were, for the powers that be who are constantly demanding this kind of data.
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of that on our end also. We're having management that's asking for, well, they're asking their IT professionals who we're talking with, hey, can we get reports on, how productive are our workers being while they're remotely? They're asking questions, security questions, just like you were just mentioning. And so what we have is, out of the box, dozens of different reports that we can run. And here's one, it's unique to Goliath. It's our end user productivity report, and it's used for both of those use cases, productivity as well as security. And I'll kind of run through the information that's within this report here and explain how it is used. So When we all started working remotely, we were having clients that were asking to see, hey, listen, I know how productive my workers are when they're in the office, but can you give me some insight into their level of productivity when they're working remotely? Not just when the user logged in and logged off for the day, but what were they actually doing within their sessions? And so we have this report here. It can be run on demand, daily, weekly, monthly. It can be sent up to different business line managers. And I'll run from left to right here, so you can see the different, the username, the client IP address where they were logging in from. So say if you see that Bob always logs in from the one client IP, and then all of a sudden he's logging in at 3 in the morning from a different client IP, okay, is that a red flag? How they connected into the environment. So was this an internal connection? Was it an external connection? Session host, when the session started, when the session changed. So we'll take Randy as an example. Session started at 9 o'clock. Session changed then at 5 o'clock. He, logged off, and this will show whether it was a logged off session, disconnect, the duration of the session. So it was for 9 hours. He interacted within a session for 7 of those 9 hours. And this is really kind of like the key metric on this report, because what goes into this interaction metric is a number of different data points, such as mouse click, keyboard input, generating ICA traffic. So not the standard idle active with Citrix reporting, but gives you an accurate representation of how much that user was actually within their session, so that they can't beat the, hey, if I just hit my mouse once every 15 minutes, it's going to show that I'm active. You have the inactivity amount. So, 7, out of the 9 hours was inactive for 2 of them. The max inactivity time was for 42 minutes. Maybe Randy stepped out for lunch for that time. And the percent interaction time, so 78%. So this is used to understand, okay, are our users actually being productive? But then also from the security aspect, where say, for example, we touched on, a user logging in at a completely abnormal time for them from a different IP, just as an example, it could be a red flag. You can see the different published applications that they're using. Are they using something that they typically wouldn't? Or the max inactivity time, where we have clients that they'll set policies where if a user is inactive for an hour, that policy is to then disconnect the session. So it's just not hanging out there. If you run this report and you see that, okay, there was a max inactivity time of over an hour, then you know that that policy isn't taking place. And there's something wrong as far as, with that particular policy that you actually do want to have enforced, but until you have the objective evidence, you wouldn't know if it was or if it wasn't being enforced. So there's a number of different ways that all this data can be used to be able to get insight into user behavior, security concerns. And as far as how easy it is to be able to run these reports, I'll just kind of show a quick example of how that can be done. Just flip over to the technology. And there we go. All right, great. So where I'm at right within the technology is the reporting functionality, or the tab. And here you can see all the reports that you have running in your environment, the description of it, the type of report, the owner, the scheduling. So is this one that's going to be run daily? Is this going to be run weekly? Last time it ran, and also the next time it's set to run. So that'll make more sense once I just kind of show how easy it is to create a new report. So as far as, first step, deciding, okay, is this a published apps and desktop report that I'm trying to run? Is it a virtual desktops report? Is it some performance from the health of the environment? Maybe you're trying to see, how are, CPU utilization on your different hosts, or any type of, Windows event log, syslog messaging. And to create any type of report that you want, and we'll do end user productivity as an example, just click on the report, decide how you want to sort the columns. So whether you want to sort it by, in alphabetical order, if you want to sort it by, when the session, in sequential order of when the users were logging in, or if you want to have it the users that were interacting the least in their session, you can be able to set it up that way. You can include or exclude certain users, and then you have the ability to select what columns that you want to include in the report. Here, you can be able to decide what subset of the environment that you want to run those reports on. So say if you're just trying to have this report for the accounting department be sent up to the accounting business line manager, you can do that. Say if you're just trying to run it for the sales department and have it go to their managers, or if you want it for the entire environment, you can have that be run. Then you have the report name, type of description. You can assign report owners, so whether it's for all users, or if you want to specify where, say, if Stacy wants to have her own set of reports, you can just be able to select her as the owner. choose how you want to export it. So whether this is via email, whether this is, PDF, CSV, and then the scheduling. Do you want to run this on demand? Do I want to have this run weekly where every Monday at 8 a.m. I'm going to come in and be able to have this type of report waiting for me in my inbox? And then choose the time period of what you want that data to include. So do I want to see just, in that case, want to come in each Monday, have the report first thing in the morning of the previous week's worth of data? And really, it is that simple. You then create the report. The next run, the report that was run last will be up at the top, or you could obviously sort any of these. And then from each one, you're able to just click on that particular report. You can view all of the different reports that you have of that specific type. And from here, any of these reports that are already set up, you don't need to go through that whole process. If you want to run one on demand, you have the ability to just hit the run now option right there, and it'll start running that report for you. So the ability to obviously run the reports very easily is, you don't want to have to go through hoops to be able to create a new report, but the fact that you're also able to have data and this much information be able to be sent to whoever is requesting it is something else that's very, our clients tell us is very valuable. And with that, let me pull back up to the PowerPoint slide. And I believe I'm passing it over to you, Stacy.
That's it. And I hope we got a few questions, Bart, for James, Avi. We'll get to them in here in 1 second. One question that typically comes through is, how hard is this to set up? So I like to proactively respond to that you can get up and running, getting data in less than 2 hours. And it's really because of the embedded intelligence and automation that comes with the product. We're going to auto-discover your entire environment, whether that's Citrix Cloud or Citrix On-Prem. We're going to auto-deploy our technology. We have the ability to identify what to monitor and how to monitor. So we have built lots of intelligence in the product, which will look for any potential IT failure points, conditions, automatically set alerts on them, and then alert you based on industry best practice thresholds. And it's that intelligence that allows people to not only get up and running, but to really use the product efficiently and quickly. So with that, Bart, I'd like to kind of turn it over for questions, and there is an email address at the bottom of the next slide Avi's going to flip over to. If you are interested in a trial, we support a fully supported 30-day trial of the software. Just email techinfo@Goliath Technologies, or if you're interested in seeing some other a personalized demo or other capabilities, we really just scratch the surface around some of those hot button topics.
I was going to say, I had a quick question about your auto deploy there, because I work in financial services, and basically the rule in our environments, especially our cloud environments, is nothing's allowed to talk to anything unless we specifically say it first. So if you wanted to set that up in a high security environment, what sort of openings would you need to open up in order to be able to facilitate that?
Sure. As far as the communication, we don't use any non-standard ports. Just about all the communication is done via port 443. So as far as the actual communication, and we're primarily, in most cases, an on-prem solution. So you'll host the Goliath server and then just have, really port 443 is all that's needed in most cases to be able to communicate with the agents to the Goliath server.
Very good.
Yeah, one question that has come up is the question about, do you have a dashboard that will show the health of the entire Citrix infrastructure? And the second one actually ties into that one, specifically around the ADC. Is it integrated? Can we see something, that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So I think what someone may be talking about was our automatic discovery and dependency map for Citrix. So let me pull that up right now. And this one wasn't shown, so I'm not sure if this person has seen a previous webinar or whatnot. I think this probably sounds what they were referring to, where one piece of the technology is that we are automatically upon deployment able to discover all of the components that contribute to Citrix, map them out, and show the correlations between the different components, including ADC. And so this is typically used as a knock view, have it up on a large screen where you can quickly see the overall health of the environment. But it's also something that's important about it is the embedded intelligence and automation, because the modern rules behind a lot of the alerts in the technology drive this as a heat map structure. So as issues start to arise on individual components, say there's a broker service error on a particular delivery controller, it would turn red, just letting you know, hey, there's a critical alert that has been fired on that. You click on it, you'd see all the alerts on the right-hand side, as well as resource utilization, context-specific health checks. And this automatically updates to any changes in the environment also. So very little legwork for any client when they, once it's stood up and it'll recognize all the components. And also for, say, example, service providers, where you have, you could be managing, 12 different clients, just as an example. You can always flip to each of their different Citrix sites and be able to quickly see the overall health of them all in just a single view. So that's, hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I guess so. So how is Goliath different from Citrix Directory, which is built in, and Citrix Analytics? Which are the main differences?
Sure, I can take that one. So as far as with Citrix Directory does a good job, and Analytics does a good job of giving, okay, is it Citrix that's the issue? But there, as we all know, there's a lot of different technologies that impact user experience outside of just Citrix. So let me see, I do have a slide that is good to explain that, where everything that you see on the screen here that is not red, you pretty much have visibility with Director in. But as we all know, there's other variables such as, the endpoint device, how's the connection at that user's location. In healthcare, the different EHR applications. You have, the hypervisor layer, the backend systems, and, we keep all that historically. So to have all of that under a single central console to be able to look back historically and be able to identify bottlenecks that could have been plaguing the environment for, multiple weeks, instead of just being able to talk to somebody on the phone where they're having an issue at that very moment, it gives you that extra full visibility into the environment and to be able to troubleshoot historically as well. So, I could pass it over to James, see if you had any additional insight that you want to provide, or Stacy.
I'm quite familiar with Director and Web Studio myself. I think I hate Director. That's the main thing. I find it really annoying, but that's just me. I mean, it can be difficult sometimes to find out what you want and present it. I mean, one thing that we always talk about, and I think they just touched on it there, is that we like to see an aggregate view of the health of our service, which doesn't necessarily just include the Citrix components, right? Two components that I have are I have 28 file shares where my profiles sit on, right? And if one of those goes down, I have a big issue because of a bug in FS Logix, which is really annoying, which I'll not get into at the minute, and just impacted me today actually. So I lost one file share and all the rest of them the users couldn't get onto. So I need to understand that. And also things like, another key part of our infrastructure is our MFA, right? Because without that, we can't log in at all, right? We had an 8-hour outage on MFA once, and even the admins couldn't log in, which showed us that there was a big single point of failure. So I think it's that holistic view that people want to look for, to go there and be able to drill down in there. I hate to use a cliche, but that single pane of glass, I guess, is the one that people keep coming up with.
Yeah, and about the can I?
Go ahead, Bart, that's fine.
Yeah, sorry. On the historic data, you just touched on the data. Where is it stored? Is it stored locally in the cloud, in a SQL database somewhere?
Yeah, SQL backend database.
Yeah, perfect.
So could you run that in an SQL service, in a cloud service, or does it need a proper full fat like AppV does?
No, yeah, it could, wherever SQL instance, whether it's remote, if it's on-prem, you can have it point to that.
Cool.
Other questions?
Yeah, there's one question left, I think. How do you deal with multi-platform stuff like Citrix? Yeah, there's not only Citrix, there's VMware, there's Microsoft, there's AWS. Never people are in multiple platforms. How do you match them together?
Sure. I can take that one. And yeah, I mean, that's, when we're talking about just, for example, the previous question, as far as, the difference with Director and us is that we are combining all those technologies into a single console. So whether it's any of your Windows VMs, whether they're sitting on VMware, we're able to pull in, it doesn't matter where the workloads, the users, or the infrastructure is located at, we're able to give some of that deep visibility that I showed just in, a couple different screens today within the technology. So absolutely. And a lot of the best practices in embedded intelligence is based off of a combination of all those different technologies and just years of experience from them.
Is there anything else you can do with that? That automation stuff that you showed, is it just limited to logging on and running the app, or could you actually do something a bit cleverer with it? I'm thinking I've got 250 websites that are business critical websites. They're internal apps, right? And if we do like an upgrade to the browser or something like that, we have to verify that they all work, which is a lot of work for somebody. So I'm just wondering if that sort of automation can do that as well, or
yeah, we do have technology that can do that. So where it's not just for Citrix, where I was showing that as an example, but where it could do for, web page, it can take complex actions and workflows to be able to see where there could be potential issues. So.
Ooh, sounds interesting.
And Avi, real quick, do you have the end user scorecard? Because when you were talking about the difference between Citrix, Director, Analytics, we don't need to spend, I know we're almost out of time here, but if you have that to come up, this is something that we are just launching now and working with clients on. And it's really that perspective of, you don't want to just monitor or report or troubleshoot an IT element. You do want to take it from that end user's perspective. And so here's a kind of a report or dashboard view where you can see what their score is in terms of overall experience, right? And you can come in here. When you talk about the difference, one of the things we hear about Citrix Analytics is, yes, they'll give you that trending data and it makes you feel good if it's green, but when it's yellow or red, you can't dig in and actually get to the details to understand why it's yellow or red. So we're really able to provide that perspective around who that end user is, and not only give you that score, but then you can actually drill down and see if there is a problem, who's having the problem, why they're having the problem, and really isolate that. So it's just kind of another view. So when you talk about some of the differences, this is one of the other ones I was going to mention briefly.
Is that going to be something that you can customize? Because I know in certain environments, the metrics that make up a good or a bad user experience differ slightly. That's good.
Yes, absolutely. So if you want to filter it even, based on like delivery group, right? You might have remote users versus users that are in the office, right? Different ways that you want to break this down. And then you can absolutely adjust the threshold. So out of the box, we're putting in Citrix best practices, but then that can all be configured.
Yeah, I've got some clients where, just for historical reasons, their logon times are very poor, and it's all caused by group policy, right? But they won't change that because security. So the best they can ever do is that. So if you said your logon times are over a minute, Citrix, according to Citrix, that's a red, right? But for them, that's as good as it's ever going to get.
No, you can adjust that so that you can know for their environment.
Okay, I think that we've gotten through most of the questions. I know a couple other ones came in, but if they, since we're at the end, what I'll probably do is send these over to the folks at Goliath, and we'll get you some answers. And I just have one last slide. I know some of you might have opted in for a chance to win an Amazon gift card. I'm just pulling up my slide right now. Make sure it works. No. Let's start that again. There it goes. Okay. I know some of you might have opted in for a chance to win. So what I like to do is pull the attendee report after the webinar, because some of you guys register after we're already underway, and I want to give everyone a fair shot. So we'll pull the attendee report, and I will run your names through the Google randomizer, and I'll select the winner. We'll alert you by email, but we'll also announce the winner on Twitter. So be sure to follow us on Twitter to find out who that is. Also, I threw some some links in the chat for you. One is to our CUGC events calendar. You can find everything you need to know or for anything that we have coming up there. And then also we have a link to the survey that I mentioned earlier. Again, it's short and anonymous, and we just really like to get your feedback. And with that, I just want to thank you guys for being with us today. Thank you, James and Avi and Stacy, and thank you, Bart, for keeping an eye on the questions. Appreciate all of you putting this on today and being with us.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, James and Bart. Now
Yeah,
to
thanks,
stay
James.
to the
Thanks,
end.
Bart. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Stephanie.
Bye-bye.
All right, have a great rest of your day. We'll see you at another CUGC event again soon. Bye.
Yes.
Cheers.